For the midpoint formula exercise, there's two types of questions you might be asked. So the first type of question would be, what is the midpoint of the line segment from 0.37 to 0.7 negative 6? So a problem like this, where we're given two endpoints and asked to find the midpoint. Well, we know that a midpoint is the exact middle of the segment. So we can write this as the average x and the average y. Because we want the exact middle. So we want the middle of the x's, we want the middle of the y's. Well, we know that when we have any point has an x value and a y value written in that order. The first number is the x, the second number is the y. And we know that to take an average, we add up the things we have and we divide by how many things we added together. So if I take the two x values that I have here for my midpoint, for my endpoints, I can say 3 plus 7. I've added two things together, so I'm going to divide it by 2. So 3 plus 7 is 10. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my average x value here is 5. I'm going to do the same thing with my y values. So I have two y values from my two endpoints. My first y value is 7. My second y value is negative 6. Be very careful. We always add, so it's 7 plus, and then whatever the y value is. In this case, say negative 6. So 7 plus negative 6 is positive 1. I'm going to divide that by 2. We could leave it as a fraction, or we can write it as a decimal. It's going to be 0.5. So let's go ahead and mark that on our graph. So if we go over here to 5.5, see that our midpoint is right here. And this makes sense. Just looking at it, we can clearly see that this is the exact middle of our line segment. So the midpoint here is at 5.5. Now we could be asked a question like this. The point 1,6 is the midpoint of negative 4, 7, and what other point? So we are given the midpoint, and we're asked to find the endpoint. Well, intuitively, how could we do this? Without any calculations, we could figure this out if we're given a graph. How could we do that? Well, in order to go from an endpoint to the midpoint, how far up or down did I have to go? I had to go down 1. Then I had to go, what? I had to go right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Since the midpoint is the exact middle, I'm going to do this again to get to the other endpoint. So if I go down 1, and then I go right 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This point right here, 6, 5, should be my other endpoint. Because I can see that if I drew a line, 1,6 would be the exact middle between 6, 5 and negative 4, 7. But how could I do this using my algebra? Well, we know that our midpoint is our average x and our average y. We know this. And we know that every point has an x and a y value. We know that when we are finding the midpoint, given the two endpoints, we take the x's from the endpoints and we add them together. So if I take negative 4, I want to add that with my other x value, but I don't know what that x value is yet, so I'm just going to make it a variable. And I know that I divided it by 2. Well, I happen to know that that answer was 1. I took my y values, 7, and whatever my other y was, I divided that by 2, And I know that my answer here was positive 6 because I know that my midpoint was 1, positive 6. So how can I use this? Well, I can just set up an equation and solve it here. So I can say negative 4 plus x over 2 is equal to positive 1. The easiest thing I can do here is say positive 1 is a whole number, so I'm going to put it over 1. And now I'm going to cross multiply. So 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times anything is itself. So this is going to be negative 4 plus x. Now I'm just solving an equation here. So I've got negative 4 plus x equals 2. I want to add 4 to both sides. So x equals 6. Okay, I'm going to do the same idea over here. So I have 7 plus y is over 2 is equal to 6. Again, 6 is a whole number, so I can put it over 1. Now I can cross multiply. 6 times 2 is 12. 1 times anything is itself. So 7 plus y is equal to 12. I can now subtract 7 from both sides of my equation to get y equals 5. So last but not least, I'm going to write my endpoint as 6, 5, which is in fact the same endpoint that I found using the graph a few minutes ago. This is how we could do it algebraically.